Out here, your gear is your lifeline. A good knife, a fire starter, and a solid rope are essentials. But what if your rope fails you? High on a mountain, wind biting, snow falling, you reach for your rope, but it's stiff and brittle. This is a survival nightmare. The cold attacks, not just your body, but your equipment. Rope loses flexibility and strength, becoming rigid and fragile. One wrong move, and your lifeline could snap. Soldiers of the past faced this too, relying on ropes that froze and became brittle. In the cold, survival means turning your enemy into an ally. World War II was fought on many fronts, but some of the toughest fights were against Mother Nature herself. On the Eastern Front, in the mountains of Italy, or during the Battle of the Bulge, soldiers faced brutal, freezing conditions. In these frozen landscapes, ropes were essential tools. Soldiers weren't just climbing mountains for fun, they were moving supplies, rescuing wounded comrades, and setting up communication lines. A rope was a multi-tool, a handrail on a slippery path, a line to pull a heavy machine gun up a hill, or a way to secure a makeshift shelter against a blizzard. The success of a mission, and the lives of the men, often hung by a thread, literally. But the cold was relentless. The standard-issue ropes, usually made of natural fibers, would soak up moisture from the snow and air. At night, this moisture would freeze, turning the rope into a stiff, unwieldy rod of ice. Worse, the internal ice crystals would act like tiny knives, weakening the rope's fibers. When a soldier put his weight on it, the rope could snap with a terrifying finality. This was a constant source of fear and frustration. Standard equipment was failing them when they needed it most. The commanders and the soldiers on the ground knew this was a critical problem. They couldn't just stop operating because it was cold, they had to adapt and innovate. Survival in these conditions wasn't just about being tough, it was about being smart. The solution they discovered was brilliant and counterintuitive. It was a trick that turned the very thing that was destroying their ropes, ice, into a source of incredible strength. This secret technique became a vital piece of knowledge passed from soldier to soldier in the harshest theaters of the war. So, what is actually happening to a rope in the cold? Let's break it down. Most ropes, especially the natural fiber ones used in World War II, are made of countless tiny threads twisted together. When a rope is warm and dry, these fibers can slide past each other just a little bit, giving the rope its flexibility. This elasticity is what makes a rope strong. Now, let's introduce water and cold. Natural fibers like hemp or cotton are like sponges. When the temperature drops below freezing, that moisture turns to ice. Ice crystals form between and inside the fibers of the rope. They lock all the individual fibers together, preventing them from moving and stretching. The rope loses its flexibility and becomes stiff as a board. A stiff rope is a brittle rope. Because the fibers can no longer stretch to distribute a load, all the force is concentrated on one small area. The sharp ice crystals also create stress points within the rope's structure, weakening it from the inside out. So when you put a sudden load on it, the rope doesn't stretch to absorb the impact. Instead, it just breaks. Even modern synthetic ropes made of nylon or polyester are not immune. Understanding this science is the first step to overcoming the problem. Faced with failing ropes, soldiers needed a solution, and they needed it fast. The answer they found seems completely backward at first. If a little bit of ice in a rope makes it weak and brittle, what would a lot of ice do? Their solution was not to try and keep the rope dry, which was often impossible. Instead, they did the exact opposite. They deliberately soaked the rope in water and let it freeze solid. It sounds crazy, right? But this was the genius of the World War II rope trick. They decided to fight ice with more ice. The logic behind this is surprisingly simple. The problem with a partially frozen rope is that the ice is inconsistent. But if you completely saturate the rope with water and then let it freeze, you are creating a solid rod of ice reinforced with rope fibers. The rope fibers act like the rebar in reinforced concrete. This technique transformed a brittle, unreliable rope into something completely different. So, how did they actually do it? Creating an ice rope is simple, but you have to do it right. First, you need your rope and a source of water. This could be a river, a stream, or even just melted snow. You also need freezing temperatures. Step 1 is to fully submerge the rope in water. You need to make sure the water penetrates deep into the core of the rope. It needs to be completely saturated, with no dry spots left inside. For a thick natural fiber rope, This might mean leaving it to soak for several minutes. Step 2 is the freezing process. Take the saturated rope out of the water. Now, you need to shape it. If you need a straight ladder or a bridge, lay the rope out perfectly straight on the snow or ice. Once you have it in the desired shape, you just leave it exposed to the freezing air. The colder the air, the quicker this will happen. Step 3 is to test it. Before you trust your life or your equipment to the ice rope, you must check that it is frozen solid. Tap it. It should feel like a solid bar of ice. If it's frozen all the way through, it will be incredibly strong and rigid. Stories from the front lines really bring these survival skills to life. During the Battle of the Bulge in the winter of 1944, an American platoon was cut off and trapped by a German advance. They were low on ammunition and supplies, and their only escape route was across a deep, narrow ravine. The other side was only about 15 feet away, but the drop was over 100 feet onto jagged, icy rocks. They had ropes, but the sheer cold had made them stiff and they didn't trust them to hold a man's swinging weight. Their platoon sergeant, a man named Miller, remembered an old trick he'd learned from a trapper. He ordered 2 of his soldiers to gather their longest hemp rope and take it to a nearby stream. The soldiers thought he was crazy, but they followed his orders, soaking the rope in freezing water. Within half an hour, the rope was frozen into a solid, unbending pole. With the help of 4 men, Sergeant Miller carefully lifted the ice rope, creating a makeshift bridge. The genius of the ice rope technique is its versatility. It's not just for making a bridge across a ravine, as Sergeant Miller did. Soldiers and survivors found all sorts of clever uses for it. Once you stop thinking of it as a rope and start thinking of it as a custom-made rigid pole, a whole new world of possibilities opens up. One common use was as a makeshift ladder. If you needed to get up a steep, icy bank or a short cliff face, you could freeze a rope and simply prop it up against the wall. It was much safer than trying to climb on slippery ice and rock. You could even freeze knots or loops into it at intervals before it became solid, creating handholds and footholds. Another clever application was for anchoring. In deep snow or on solid ice, it can be almost impossible to get a normal anchor to hold. But you could take a length of rope, freeze it into a T or L shape, and then bury it in the snow. Once the snow compacted around the frozen shape, it created an incredibly strong anchor point. The frozen rope became a deadman anchor, a classic mountaineering technique. It could also be used as a tool. The key was seeing the potential. You might be thinking, this is a great story, but I have a modern nylon rope. Is this trick still relevant for me? The answer is a definite yes. While modern synthetic ropes are more water-resistant than old natural fiber ones, they are not waterproof. They will still absorb some moisture, and they are still susceptible to the strength-sapping effects of extreme cold. The principles of the ice rope trick are timeless. In a true survival situation, you use every trick you know, whether it's ancient or modern. Imagine you're on a winter hike and a member of your group falls and injures their leg on a steep slope. You need to get them up to safer ground, but the slope is pure ice. Your modern climbing rope is too dynamic and slippery to offer a good handhold. This is the perfect time to use the ice rope trick. You could soak a section of your rope, freeze it straight, and use it as a rigid handrail. Or consider a scenario where you lose a crucial piece of gear. Perhaps your tent pole snaps in a blizzard. By soaking a length of rope and freezing it into a straight pole, you can create a makeshift replacement. It's about using your rope as a raw material to build what you need to survive. The world can be an unforgiving place. But for every challenge nature throws at us, there is a solution to be found in knowledge and ingenuity. The WWII ice rope trick is a perfect example of this. It's a testament to the human spirit of survival. It shows how, even in the most desperate of times, with the simplest of tools, we can find a way to overcome. It's about thinking outside the box, or in this case, thinking outside the normal uses of a rope. So, the next time you pack a rope for a cold weather adventure, remember this story. Understand how the cold can affect your gear. A stiff, frozen rope is a warning sign, but also remember that it can be transformed. With a bit of water in the freezing cold, that liability can become a powerful asset. If you ever get the chance, practice this. Find a safe place on a freezing day. Take an old piece of rope you don't mind experimenting with. Survival is not about taking risks, it's about managing them with knowledge.